We all know Willie Nelson for that warm, unmistakable voice that carried across decades, the red bandana tied around his head, and that calm, friendly smile that felt like a handshake from an old friend. His music was more than just songs on the radio. It was the sound of home, the feeling of sitting on a porch in the evening with people you love. He gave us stories in his music that spoke to ordinary lives, songs that felt like they belonged to us as much as they belonged to him. But what the world saw was only one side of Willie. Behind the stage lights and the sold-out shows was a man who quietly shouldered more heartache than most people would ever know. He was the person who lifted others with his music. Yet in his own life, he was carrying the weight of loss, disappointment, and health struggles that could have broken anyone else. Through the years, as he got older, the music never stopped, but neither did the challenges. It seemed like life kept throwing one trial after another his way, and when the final chapter of Willie Nelson's story unfolded, it was something even his most loyal fans weren't ready for. So today, we're going to walk through the heartbreaking journey of Willie Nelson, from his earliest days in Texas, through the triumphs and the tragedies, and finally, to the closing chapter of one of country music's greatest legends, Willie. Nelson's life began in Abbott, Texas, a tiny, rural town where the summers burned hot and the winters could feel endless. He was born there on April 29th, 1933, right in the middle of the Great Depression, when times were hard for nearly everyone in America, but especially for families living in small towns and struggling to survive. Willie's parents, Ira and Miro, weren't able to keep their marriage together. Not long after Willie was born, his mother left the family. His father remarried and eventually left too, starting a new life somewhere else. That meant young Willie and his older sister Bobby were left behind, essentially abandoned. But they weren't entirely alone. Their grandparents stepped in and raised them, and while it wasn't the easiest childhood, it was one rooted in love, faith, and music. Willie would later reflect on those early years, saying that in a way, his parents' leaving was almost a blessing in disguise. He admitted that neither of them really had the means to raise children at the time, and their absence gave him and Bobby something more important: a stable home with their grandparents. His grandmother, who had a deep love of music, filled the house with gospel songs, and Willie grew up surrounded by those sounds. His grandfather, on the other hand, worked as a blacksmith. Willie often helped him in the workshop, learning the value of hard work. But tragedy struck when his grandfather passed away from pneumonia. Willie was just 6 years old. That loss left a mark that would never fully fade. In his autobiography, Willie would later write that being separated from his mother and father felt worse than death because he knew they were still alive somewhere in the world, but they weren't there with him and Bobby as parents should be. The pain of that abandonment was something that stayed with him for decades. Still, even in the middle of that sorrow, music became the light that carried him forward. Before his grandfather died, he gave Willie his very first guitar. It was a gift that would shape the rest of his life. At just 6 years old, Willie began to teach himself chords. By 7, he was already writing little songs of his own, and by the age of 9, he had joined a local band and was singing gospel in church. For him, music wasn't just a pastime. It was an escape, a way to channel all the sadness and uncertainty of his childhood into something that gave him hope. When other kids were playing games, Willie was strumming strings and writing lyrics, turning the hardest parts of his young life into melodies. But outside of music, life in Abbott was hard. Willie and his family had to survive by working in the cotton fields, spending long hours under the unforgiving Texas sun, pulling cotton by hand. It was grueling work that left his hands blistered and his back aching. Willie despised it. Later in his life, he admitted that while he was out there in the heat, sweating and suffering, he kept thinking that there had to be a better way to make a living. Deep down, he believed that music was his ticket out of that life. Still, the road from a little cotton-picking boy in Abbott to a world-famous musician wasn't a short one. It would take years of sacrifice, heartbreak, and determination before Willie's dream would come true. By the time Willie was a teenager, his passion for music had only grown stronger. He played guitar wherever he could, performed at local gatherings, and started making a name for himself in small circles. But while his talent was undeniable, success didn't come quickly. The small-town boy with big dreams faced rejection after rejection. Record labels weren't lining up to sign him, and the world of country music was already full of stars who didn't want to make room for someone new. To survive, Willie took on odd jobs. Everything from selling encyclopedias door to door to working as a DJ at local radio stations. Those years were tough, but they taught him resilience. He learned how to keep moving forward even when the doors kept closing. And more importantly, he kept writing. Songwriting was Willie's true gift, and little by little his songs started to get attention. Other artists began recording them, and even if he wasn't famous yet, his words were making their way into the world. But behind the scenes, his personal life was often messy. He married young, had children, and struggled to balance family life with the demands of chasing a dream. Money was always tight, and Willie's determination to make it in. Music sometimes came at the cost of stability at home. There were arguments, separations, and struggles that left scars on both him and the people he loved. Through it all, though he never stopped believing in himself or in the power of music. And slowly, almost quietly, his break began to come. One song here, another one there, until eventually, Willie Nelson wasn't just another struggling songwriter. He was becoming someone people recognized, someone whose voice and words could move an audience. But even as fame began to peek over the horizon, the shadows of his difficult past never completely left him. They followed him, shaping his songs and his soul, and reminding him at every step that happiness and heartbreak often walked hand in hand. As the 1950s rolled in, Willie Nelson was a young man chasing a dream that felt both impossible and inevitable. He had the kind of stubborn determination that kept him moving forward no matter how many setbacks came his way. He worked small radio gigs, played in smoky bars, and wrote songs late into the night. His voice wasn't like everyone else's. It was softer, more conversational, and carried a kind of sincerity that wasn't always fashionable in the polished world of country music back then. For years, people told him he didn't have the right look or sound to make it big, but Willie never let that stop him. Deep down, he believed that one day his music would find its place. By the early 60s, Willie began to see glimpses of the future he had always hoped for, though his own. Recordings weren't immediate hits. His songwriting started to catch fire. Songs like Crazy, which Patsy Cline recorded and turned into a timeless classic, proved that Willie had a gift for capturing raw emotion in a way that few others could. He wrote Funny How Time Slips Away and Nightlife, and suddenly, people in Nashville started paying attention. His words were making other artists famous, and that gave him both hope and frustration. Hope, because it meant he had real talent. Frustration, because it seemed like everyone but him was getting the credit. Willie's personal life during this period was full of ups and downs. His first marriage didn't survive the pressure of his constant hustling, the long hours, and the financial struggles. He remarried, hoping for stability, but that too proved to be a difficult journey. Willie loved his family, but he was also consumed by his art, and the clash between those two worlds caused pain on both sides. His children sometimes grew up with an absent father, and Willie carried the guilt of that, even as he kept pushing forward in his career. Nashville in the 1960s wasn't always kind to Willie Nelson. The music industry had a certain mold for what country stars were supposed to be, and Willie never fit it. His appearance, long hair, beard, and later his trademark bandana, didn't match the clean-cut image of the stars on the Grand Ole Opry stage. His voice, while soulful and honest, wasn't smooth in the way producers wanted. For years, he tried to play by their rules, wearing the suits, keeping his hair short, and trying to fit in. But he always felt like an outsider. Success came slowly, And there were times when Willie wondered if he would ever truly make it as a performer. By the early 1970s. However, something began to change. Willie grew tired of trying to fit Nashville's mold and decided to do things his own way. He left Tennessee, returned to Texas, and immersed himself in a growing movement called Outlaw country. Alongside artists like Waylon Jennings, Willie embraced a style that was freer, rougher around the edges, and truer to who he really was. This was the turning point. Suddenly, the very things Nashville had criticized him for, his appearance, his unconventional voice, his independent spirit, became the reasons fans loved him. Albums like Red-Headed Stranger turned him into not just a country star, but a cultural icon. But with success came more complications. Willie's life on the road was relentless. Touring, performing, and living the outlaw lifestyle took its toll on his marriages and family. His relationships often crumbled under the weight of fame, long absences, and the temptations that came with life on the road. Divorce became a recurring chapter in his story, leaving behind broken hearts and fractured connections with the people closest to him. Even so, he tried to stay connected to his children, though it wasn't always easy. The guilt of those personal failures followed him, even while fans saw only the smiling man on stage. Willie's career soared through the 1970s and 1980s. Hits like On the Road Again, and his collaborations with artists across genres cemented his place as one of the most beloved musicians in America. He wasn't just a country star anymore, he was a national treasure, a voice that transcended boundaries. But just when it seemed like he had everything, life reminded him once again how quickly things could fall apart. Financial trouble came crashing down in the late 1980s when Willie found himself in the middle of a nightmare with the IRS. The government claimed he owed tens of millions in unpaid taxes, a debt so enormous that it threatened to wipe out everything he had worked for. The IRS seized his assets, including his beloved ranch. For anyone else, this might have been the end, but Willie, with his characteristic resilience, found a way to turn even that disaster into something almost legendary. He released an album titled The IRS Tapes, Who'll Buy My Memories, using the sales to help pay off his debts. Slowly, piece by piece, he managed to rebuild his life, showing once again that no matter how many times life knocked him down, he would find a way to stand back up. Yet, while the financial struggles made headlines, the heartbreaks behind the scenes were far more painful. Willie's life was marked by the loss of dear friends and collaborators, people who had shared the journey with him and then left too soon. Each passing cut deep, reminding him of the fragility of life. But nothing compared to the personal tragedy he faced in 1991 when his son, Willie Nelson, took his own life. That loss nearly broke Willie. He was a man who had always leaned on music to carry him through the darkest times, but this was a wound that never fully healed. Friends said that Willie carried that grief quietly, never speaking much about it, but those who knew him best could see the weight it placed on his heart. As the years went on, Willie's body began to feel the wear and tear of the hard-living lifestyle he had led. The long nights on the road, the smoking, the drinking, they all caught up to him. He faced several health scares, from emphysema to bouts of pneumonia, and there were times when fans wondered if he would make it back to the stage. But time after time, Willie proved them wrong. He would recover, step back into the spotlight, and sing with that same voice that had comforted generations. Still, the reality was clear. He was aging, and no amount of music or resilience could stop the clock. Through it all, Willie Nelson never stopped creating. Even in his later years, he continued to write, record, and perform. His songs reflected the wisdom and the weariness of a man who had lived through just about everything: abandonment, poverty, rejection, success, love, loss, and grief. Fans saw him not just as a musician, but as a survivor, someone who embodied both the beauty and the heartbreak of life itself. By the time the 1990s faded into the 2000s, Willie Nelson was more than just a country music singer. He was a living symbol of resilience. He had outlasted the critics, the record labels that once dismissed him, the financial collapse that nearly ruined him, and the personal tragedies that would have broken lesser men. But even as the world continued to celebrate him, Willie's life remained a balancing act between joy and sorrow. His music was still a gift to millions, but behind the curtain, his body and spirit were often tested in ways the public didn't always see. Willie's health had become a constant source of worry, not just for fans but for his family and friends. Years of smoking and the hard-living outlaw lifestyle had left their mark. He suffered from lung problems, emphysema, and recurring bouts of pneumonia. Each time he fell ill, rumors spread that this might finally be the end for the red-headed stranger. Concerts were canceled, tours postponed, and the headlines filled with speculation. Yet somehow, time and again, Willie came back. His determination to keep performing wasn't about money or fame anymore. It was about the music itself. For him, singing wasn't just a career. It was the reason to keep going, the thread that tied him to life. Even in his late 70s and 80s, Willie continued to record new albums, proving that his creativity hadn't dimmed with age. His songs carried a deeper wisdom now, reflections on mortality, forgiveness, and the fleeting nature of time. Fans connected with these songs on an even greater level because they weren't just hearing music. They were hearing the voice of a man who had lived through the full spectrum of human experience. Every note carried the weight of his past, the joys, the mistakes, and the heartbreaks. But life wasn't only about music for Willie in these later years. He dedicated himself to causes close to his heart, especially Farm Aid, the benefit concerts. He co-founded in the 1980s to support struggling American farmers. Year after year, Willie remained the face of that movement, raising millions to help those who too often felt forgotten. It was another side of his legacy, proof that he wasn't just singing songs, but living out the values he believed in. Still, his personal life continued to carry its share of struggles. His marriages had left scars, and while he eventually found stability with his wife Annie, the earlier years of broken relationships were never truly forgotten. His children, too, carried their own struggles, sometimes feeling the absence of a father who had been more present on stage than at home. The loss of his son Billy remained a quiet sorrow that Willie never fully spoke about. Friends would say that even decades later, they could see the grief in his eyes whenever Billy's name came up. In the 2010s, Willie began facing health scares with increasing frequency. His breathing problems forced him to cancel shows, and each time, fans held their breath, wondering if this might be the last time they would ever see him perform. In 2019, he canceled a tour due to breathing issues, and the headlines were filled with speculation about his decline. Willie, as always, responded with humor, assuring fans he would be back. And sure enough, he was. Time and again, he defied the odds. It became almost a running theme in his life. Every time people thought he was done, he surprised them by walking back onto the stage with a guitar in hand. But no one, not even Willie Nelson, could outrun time forever. As he grew older, the years began to weigh heavier on him. His once endless energy began to slow, and though his voice remained strong, the strain of traveling and performing became more difficult. Those who knew him best said that while he never admitted it openly, Willie knew his time was running short. He had lived a life fuller than most people could ever dream of, but he also knew that nothing lasts forever. The final chapter of Willie's life was bittersweet. He continued to perform as long as he possibly could, refusing to let age silence him. His final shows carried an emotional weight, with fans often in tears as they watched him sing the songs. That had been the soundtrack of their lives. Songs like Always on My Mind and Blue Eyes. Crying in the Rain felt even more powerful now, as if Willie were saying goodbye in the most honest way he knew how. Through music. When Willie finally stepped off the stage for the last time, it was not with bitterness or regret, but with gratitude. He had lived nearly 9 decades, given the world countless songs, and turned his pain into art that would live forever. He once said that music was his therapy, his way of making sense of life's hardships, and in the end, that was true. Not just for him, but for the millions of people who found comfort in his songs. The world mourned when Willie Nelson's final chapter closed, but his legacy was undeniable. He was more than a country singer. He was a storyteller, a survivor, and a symbol of hope. He showed that even when life is filled with heartbreak, it's possible to keep going, to keep singing, to keep living with a smile on your face. His journey was far from easy, but it was real. And maybe that's why people loved him so much, because Willie Nelson was never just an untouchable star. He was one of us. Looking back, his story is both heartbreaking and inspiring. The boy abandoned by his parents grew into a man who gave the world music that will never fade. The cotton fields of Texas seemed a long way from the bright lights of fame, but Willie carried the lessons of those early days with him always. He knew the sting of loss, the ache of loneliness, the weight of regret, but he also knew the joy of friendship, the beauty of music, and the comfort of forgiveness. In the end, Willie Nelson's life was a testament to endurance. He endured poverty, rejection, financial ruin, heartbreak, and tragedy. He endured illness, aging, and the constant shadow of mortality. But through it all, he never stopped playing, never stopped writing, never stopped singing. And because of that, his music will keep playing long after his final song. For his fans, that's the gift he leaves behind. The reminder that even in heartbreak, there's always a melody to carry us through. When people look back on Willie Nelson's story, it's easy to see the legend. The outlaw country pioneer, the Grammy-winning songwriter, the activist, and the performer who seemed to never grow old. But if you peel back the surface, what really stands out is the man who lived through pain and loss but refused to let those things define him. Willie Nelson's legacy isn't only in the songs he wrote or the records he sold. It's in the way he showed the world that no matter how hard life gets, there's always a reason to keep going. His life was not perfect. It was messy, complicated, and filled with struggles, but it was real. And that authenticity is what made him timeless. For Willie, music was never about chasing fame or fortune. Those things came eventually, but they were never the heart of his mission. From the time he was a boy holding that first guitar, music was about survival. It was the thread that held him together when his parents left, when his grandfather died, when he was working in the hot Texas sun, and when life seemed too heavy to bear. It was there when his marriages fell apart, when the IRS tried to strip away everything he had, and when his son's tragic death nearly broke him. Time and time again, when life knocked him down, Willie picked up his guitar and sang his way through it. That's the kind of resilience people can feel when they hear him. You don't just listen to Willie Nelson. You believe him. Even in his final years, when his body slowed and illness crept closer, Willie's spirit never dimmed. He never let bitterness take root. Instead, he leaned on humor, kindness, and the same gentle smile that had been with him since the beginning. Those who spent time with him in his later days often remarked that he carried himself with a peace that could only come from having faced every storm life could throw and still standing tall. He knew his time was limited, but he wasn't afraid of it. He often said he saw death not as an enemy, but as another part of the journey, and that perspective gave comfort to those around him. The heartbreak of Willie's story lies not only in the tragedies he faced, but also in the quiet understanding that he endured more than most people ever knew. Fans saw the concerts, the interviews, and the awards, but they didn't always see the nights when he was grieving alone, the guilt he carried for being absent in his children's lives, or the physical pain that came with aging after decades of living on the road. Yet even with all of that, Willie never let sorrow silence him. Instead, he turned it into art. That is why his music resonates so deeply, because within every lyric and every note is a piece of his own life, his own heartbreak. Given freely to anyone who needed it, his passing left a hole in the world of music, but also a sense of gratitude. People everywhere looked back not only on his career but on the way he lived. He wasn't perfect, and he never pretended to be. He made mistakes, owned up to them, and kept moving forward. In that way, Willie Nelson wasn't just a country singer. He was a teacher. His life taught us about endurance, forgiveness, and the healing power of music. He reminded us that it's okay to stumble, to fall, to lose your way. As long as you keep going. In towns across America, from the smallest honky-tonks to the largest stadiums, people gathered to remember him, singing along to the songs that had been with them for decades. Farmers he had helped through Farm Aid shared stories of how Willie's work had saved their land. Fellow musicians told tales of how his generosity and wisdom had shaped their own careers. And fans, millions of them, spoke about how his music had been the soundtrack of their lives, carrying them through their own heartbreaks and triumphs. That, perhaps, is the greatest measure of his legacy. Not the awards on his shelf, but the lives he touched along the way. Even now, his influence can be heard in every corner of the country music and beyond. Artists, young and old, cite him as an inspiration, not just for his songs but for his refusal to conform to the rules of the industry. He showed that being yourself, even if it doesn't fit the mold, is the only way to truly connect with people. And in a world that often demands perfection, Willie's flaws were what made him unforgettable. There's something haunting about the way his later songs sounded, almost as if he knew he was writing his own farewell. When he sang about time, slipping away, or about the ones he'd lost, it felt like he was opening a window into his own soul. And maybe that's why, when the end finally came, it was such a shock for his fans. Even though he was old, even though the signs were there, people weren't ready to say goodbye. Willie Nelson had always been there, always come back, always walked onto that stage again. To imagine a world without him felt impossible. But perhaps the beauty of Willie's story is that even though he's gone, he never truly left. His songs are still here, his voice still echoes, and his spirit still lingers in the lives of the millions who found comfort in his music. For every person who listens to On the Road, Again with a Smile, or cries to Always on My Mind, or finds peace in Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain, Willie Nelson is still alive. He may no longer walk among us, but his music ensures that he never really leaves. In the end, Willie Nelson's journey was both heartbreaking and extraordinary. He began life as an abandoned child in a small Texas town, endured hardship and loss at every stage, and still found a way to give the world joy. He carried pain that most of us will never know, but he never let it destroy him. Instead, he transformed that pain into something beautiful, something eternal. His life was proof that even when the world takes everything from you, there's still something worth holding on to. For Willie, that was music. For his fans, it was Willie. What happened to Willie Nelson in the end? The answer is simple and profound. He lived. He lived through heartbreak, through loss, through failure, and through triumph. He lived a life that was honest, imperfect, and deeply human, and in doing so he gave us a gift that will last forever. His final chapter may have closed, but his story will be told for generations to come. Every time someone picks up a guitar, every time a voice carries through the night, every time a song gives someone hope when they need it most. Willie Nelson is gone, but the music, the lessons, and the spirit of resilience remain, and that is a legacy no amount of heartbreak can ever take away.